It is my privilege to introduce to you, if you don't know him already, this is someone who needs no introduction, Jason Stanley, who is the Jacob Urofsky Professor of Philosophy at Yale University, and who has written a series of extremely impactful, widely read books. I was given how propaganda works when I was researching hate speech in Delhi, but Jason's here to talk about his latest book, which is called Erasing History. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. So I should thank people in this room who have, the little people who've helped me along the way, like Jeff Vulcan.
No one's accused of being small.
Okay, so it's kind of strange to be given, am I being recorded now?
Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
A copy of this is being sent to Doge.
Right.
So I wrote this book, Erasing History, last year, thinking that it was in all likelihood going to be the case that Trump was going to be reelected and we would have the regime that we now face. So, and I thought that people would be aware about attacks on courts. They would be aware about how authoritarians attack the media. But people consistently forget or don't understand the focus authoritarians have on universities. Authoritarians always go after universities, especially in the modern era. And what I wanted to do with this book is to sort of structure the conceptual space to explain why universities and schools are such a huge target of authoritarians. To start with, note that there are no liberal arts colleges in authoritarian countries. Like, China doesn't have like a liberal arts college where you discuss the problems of, where you raise issues about the Chinese regime and you criticize, you criticize the politicians and, all free inquiry. That doesn't exist in China. It doesn't exist in Russia. You've got to get rid of critical inquiry if authoritarianism is going to go unchallenged. Because what you do in the university is you subject hierarchies to critique. You subject everything to critique. You certainly subject hierarchies of power to critique. Now, right now, what we're facing is a regime that explicitly says it wants to impose patriotic education. It explicitly says that universities are anti-American. Now, if you just ask yourself, what kind of regime says we have to have patriotic education rather than critical education? I think, if you've read, say, a book, you might be able to answer that yourself. What happens when you want to destroy democracy? What you want to do is you want a compliant population who says the leader shows our glory and I support the leader or else I'm some kind of traitor to the country. So all of that is obvious, right? It's obvious that there might be a role for patriotic education, some kind of patriotic education in a democracy. My colleague Stephen Smith has argued that. But they explicitly want to say they want to replace the critical part of education. They want to center patriotic education. It's fine. I'm not criticizing here talking more about your country and the education system than other countries. Though our universities are supposed to be international, right? So that's a little weird. Like, the idea that our universities should be praising America and not criticizing it because they're American universities, well, I guess we might start to attract fewer international students in that case, because we'll no longer be international universities. If our raison d'etre is to praise America and if we should be, our federal funding should be cut because we're not aligning with America first interest, well then we do not have an international university system. Then we have like an American nationalist, America first. Why should someone from Hong Kong send their kids to a university to learn about how America is so much greater than the rest of the world and there are no critiques of America? That seems ludicrous. So it's clearly an attack on the US education system, which is the greatest in the world. Now, I'm not saying that a nationalist, that you can't have in K through 12 education more focus on your country than on other countries. Of course you can and should. Like Norway is gonna have more stuff about Norway, talking about their glorious history as ice fishermen. They used to fish ice and that was really impressive. And so, I'm not anti-Norwegian. But you know, Norway will have more about Norway in its school curriculum than it has about Poland. And that's fine, or Spain, and that's fine. I'm not talking about that. But that's just learning about the history of your country. It's not glorifying your country above all else. Demanding that your universities praise America. Think about that. Think about what's happening right now. So now for people who are familiar with authoritarianism in other countries, what is happening here now is familiar. And that was my goal in this book. My goal in this book was to take, say, what happened with India's universities in 2019 when the Citizenship Amendment Act was passed, and which along with the National Registry relegates Muslims to second-class citizenship. What happened in India's universities? Guess what students do when they try to relegate people, some members of the populace, into second-class citizens? Students tend to protest. Students tend to protest against war. Students tend to protest against oppression. Students tend to protest in favor of groups that are targeted. So what did India do? The Indian media viciously attacked the universities as pro-Muslim, as attacking, as anti-Indian, as anti-nationalists. They represented university students as traitors to the nation for pushing for Muslim supremacy when they were pushing, of course, for Muslim equality. They arrested the organizers and charged them with a litany of charges. They were in prison, but they were released. I forgot the timeline. Pindra Todd were the organizers, right? The people. So Pindra Todd were the people who organized the Me Too in Indian universities, and then they turned their attention to organizing protests. There are two main organizers who were arrested and charged with very serious crimes. I think they're still charged with them, right?
There's also student unions.
Also student unions. They targeted student unions, yeah. So it was a major attack on universities, and right now it's always, for someone, the project of this book is to place what's happening, just to give an international and historical context to the attack on education, to the role education plays as a target in authoritarianism. So I'm always looking for explicit discussions between explicit connections. The strategies are there, like what's happening with US universities after last year's protests against the Israelis, the genocide in Gaza, or the threatened genocide in Gaza, the anti-war protests last year, looks very similar to what happened in India in 2019. Down to the media saying the universities are anti-American. It's exactly what India did. Now, that said, I haven't been able to pinpoint communication between have you? I haven't tried, but it's very clear there's communication between Orban's regime and Orban and say the authors of Project 2025. It's clear that they're doing to Columbia University what he did to Central European University. He vilified Central European University as anti-Hungarian, anti-national, and drove them out of the country using the courts and legal system, using the accreditation system. That's why you had Trump talking about, I'm gonna use the accreditation system, right? It's not clear how he's gonna use it, but that's what they did in Hungary. They passed a law saying you could only give out degrees if you're accredited in Hungary. CEU is accredited by Bard College, through Bard College, because people want US accredited degrees, and so CEU couldn't give out degrees, so they had to move to Vienna. But in the case of India, the overlap between what's happening now and what happened in India in 2019 is very striking. But it's hard to tell. We've been having this conversation for a decade. How much is just a natural playbook, like what you would do anyway, and how much is like communication? Like I had an interview yesterday, and they're like, do you think anyone is reading about Gleichschaltung in Nazi Germany? Like, who's a scholar of Nazi Germany in the Trump administration? I'm like, I don't really think you need a scholar of Nazi Germany to know you should replace the federal bureaucracy by loyalists. I mean, I think that's kind of an obvious move. But what we are seeing is, I think in the case of Hungary, it's kind of, there are explicit connections, right? There's, Orban visits Mar-a-Lago. And I recently, over the summer, I was teaching in a critical race theory summer institute in Nashville, Tennessee. Because Kim Crenshaw, she's like, where's the worst place to have this? And then we have to do it there. And I met Justin Jones, one of the two state legislators who had been expelled for his protests and reinstated. And the first question he asked me was, what do you know about the Danube Institute? I'm like, what the hell is a 28-year-old Tennessee state legislator asking me about the Viktor Orban's think tank? Well, it turns out the Tennessee state legislature passed a resolution praising the Danube Institute. And there's a video of Justin Jones asking the Speaker of the House, do you know who Viktor Orban is? To which the Speaker of the House responds, no, I don't. And then when you read the legislation, which what they passed, I sent it to my Hungarian contacts who have been following the stuff for years. The legislation praises the funders of the Danube Institute. And my friends are like, oh, this is amazing. We didn't have this information in Hungary. So what is the Tennessee state legislature doing? Passing a bill that was clearly written by people in Hungary without knowing anything about it. So there are clearly those overlaps. But structurally, what you can see, targeting universities, demanding patriotic education. This is kind of color by numbers authoritarianism. Then you want to, this is what I'm doing in this book. I'm trying to say, let's put things in a broader context. What does so that's the overarching goal. Just to summarize where we are so far before I go into the sort of there's a clock over there. More fine-grained details of the book. I'm talking about what's particularly relevant for the current moment. We're at the phase where they're creating fear, right? And they're going after the authoritarian takeover is going after categories, federal bureaucracy. I was just teaching Wilhelm Reich's mass psychology of fascism, and Reich talks about is talking about how he's asking the question, how did these different categories of people who shouldn't have been voting for the Nazis, how were they brought to vote for the Nazis? And he talks about federal workers. He talks about, industrial workers. And urban industrial workers. He said they shouldn't have been voting for the Nazis because the Nazis were attacking unions. So what were they doing voting for the Nazis? And he says, what the Nazis did is they vilified the federal workers. The federal workers made kind of the same salaries as the industrial workers, because there were strong unions at the time. But they had permanent job security and they weren't working in factories. So they were vilified as mooching off the state, as sort of living off the state and being lazy, and not being hard workers, and having your tax dollars, your industrial workers' tax dollars going to their easy lives. And then Wilhelm Reich says federal workers had a higher social status than factory workers. So, you could bring your federal worker boyfriend home to your parents, and that would be a good marriage, but it would be harder to bring your factory worker boyfriend home. And so Reich says they exploited that difference in social hierarchy to get the industrial workers to support them against the federal, by sort of using the federal workers as a target. And that is, some version of that is, you say these people are living off federal money, they're lazy, and then what you do is you dump them and you replace them with loyalists. You can use I talk about this in the book about, you can use then the systems as systems of patronage. So if you look at the Florida university system, you'll see that a lot of the positions of power are, let's just say, since I'm being recorded, let's say, it could easily appear that they're being used as patronage for Republican, like the Florida, New College of Florida, or things like this, as patronage for supporters of DeSantis. There's a case to be made. But that would be a color by numbers authoritarianism. You fire and replace with using that as patronage. Okay, I want to contextualize I do start off, this book was written during the campus protests. It was written in the fall of 2024. And is it the fall of 2024 now? What is it now? No, it wasn't written in the fall of 2024. It just came out in September 2020. Right, it was written in the fall of 2023. So I begin this book by talking about, so I was writing this book in September and October of 2023. I've handed in the final manuscript in March 2024. So I talk in the beginning about how Fox News, I wrote these paragraphs in October 2023 about how Fox News was saying that universities were filled with pro-Hamas supporters and they were filled with terrorists, and it was like so they seeded, that was well before the campus protests started. So before the campus protests started, they were already saying universities are pro-terrorist, pro-Hamas. And then the campus protests kind of fit into that already laid thing. And so you could then say you could then have this structure that fit protests, which, where people were having Shabbos, did Shabbat, and, there was a large Jewish representation in the protests. Whatever you think about them, that's true. But it was already set up. They were set up to be fed into this structure where you could say universities are anti-American. And they're gonna use something. It doesn't matter what the protests are about in the end. Okay, so let me talk, so that's the up to the moment structuring of what this book did, and it does. And that's why the book was written. The book was written because I knew people were gonna be taken by surprise that the Trump regime was going to be so focused on education. And you still can't get the media to talk to it. Every morning I send out a blast to my friends in the media. Are you talking about education yet? Are you talking about education? No, we're talking about, the price of eggs. And so it remains the case that people are befuddled by the role of schools and universities in a democracy. courts are clearer to them, the media is clearer to them, the media is under immense threat right now. But schools and universities are always the front line. Now, part of the attack, the form of the attack, and this leans into this idea of patriotic education, is crafting a narrative, crafting a uniform narrative. What does Linda McMahon mean? Linda McMahon said, what did she say? Somebody look this up if you can, just make sure I'm quote. But I think she said, our last act in the Department of Education is to make sure there's patriotic education. So what does that mean? It's a telling, and she's talking about universities too. Imagine that. So it's the crafting of a fictional story. They're explicitly saying that they want schools and universities to tell a fictional story of the greatness of the nation. So this book is about the crafting, like a central theme of this book is, that's why it's called Erasing History, is the crafting of a fictional story. Where now all paths through history involve some erasing, because I can't be sitting here telling you about like then at time T, Bob Caveman and Mary Caveman, I suppose there are no Mary cave people back then, but you know what I mean, dropped a stone here. You have to take a particular path. You've gotta drop some stories. So there's a important methodological question about what stories to tell and what stories to leave out. And this has been, I was at one event with a historian at UConn, Ethan Goldstein, or I think his last name is Goldstein. He was really smart. So I'm probably messing up his last name in that kind of way that when people call me Joshua. But he said, isn't all history like fascist history? Meaning like the structure of history itself is written to glorify certain things and leave out other things. But this is a conversation that history as a discipline has been having for Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. These are critiques we've been discussing in academia for a while, but they're trying to, like Trump himself denounced Howard Zinn in 2020. I'm sure someone else put that, I don't care whether, but Trump denounced Howard Zinn as propaganda, because what they're trying to, what the goal is to set up a certain version of history that represents in the United States, that represents the United States as the culmination of all of history. So the idea is that all human civilization has resulted in the glory that is the United States. That's really going to attract students from other countries. So now I spend a lot of I have to make sure not to make, lately I have to make sure, I make humorous remarks in my classes with Jack all the time, but we don't put them on YouTube. Hitler talks a lot, Doug, the Kaibar in law school, once followed me around a party with his watch, and Kaiser. He followed me around a party with his watch, and finally I was like, what are you doing, Doug? And he's like, I'm timing how long it takes you to go from 0 to Nazi. That was 6 seconds. So at any rate, Hitler, you might have heard of him, in Mein Kampf talks a lot about education. And I don't know what he says. And Hitler says that Germany should represent itself. German education should take the form as representing Germany as successor to Greece and Rome. The story that he's telling, that Hitler says we should tell, and George Mossy discusses this at length, is this idea that German education said, well, really the Roman the Germans had a big influence on Rome, and really maybe some of the emperors of Rome were German, and really maybe it was really Germans who were there in Greece and running the show. And so what Hitler was doing, so this is this old, long civilization, Hitler says Julius Caesar praised the German tribes strong. Oh wait, that wasn't Hitler. Sorry. No one laughed. So Hitler was trying to say, look, Germanness runs all the way back to Greece, and in fact, all the civilizational accomplishments of Greece and Rome, in fact, are kind of intertwined with Germans in some way. And so what you could see Hitler is calling for was a reading back of some kind of idea of whiteness and Aryanness back into Greece. So the idea is there's this great civilization, ancient Greece. Then there's the Roman Empire. And now there's Germany. And this is this great civilizational line. Well, and that gives people this sense of, that their country and the founders of their country are the inheritors, the ones who are carrying forth this great white tradition. And weirdly, I learned that the United States was the inheritor of ancient Greece and Rome when I went to school. And I heard that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were the ones to whom we owe the furtherance of this great tradition. So one of the issues when you're reading Mein Kampf is that it's like, whoa. And Hitler says, I have the quotes here, we have lost the art of plucking great men of our nation, Aryans, from the past and showing them as the exemplars of the nation. So this is patriotic education. And what you do is you represent your country as the inheritor of Greece and Rome, and whiteness as going back all the way to that, and your founders as the ones who are continuing that tradition. Now, what I try to do is, no, what I actually do is I put these tactics together. I link them to colonialism. In the literature on fascism, the initial literature, there's a lot of different streams in literature on fascism. There's patriarchy, but one stream is colonialism, the link between colonialism and fascism, which is of course present in part 2 of Origins of Totalitarianism is called imperialism. Césaire's discourse on colonialism links imperialism and fascism. So I'm a Michigan fan. Are you from Minnesota? Is that Minnesota? Oh, no, Murray State, wow.
Oh, right off.
I totally got the conference. So I tried to make sense of that, the education part of that connection between fascism, between hierarchy, between the idea that one group is sort of responsible for the civilization, and so you owe that group all the credit, which is what's happening in the United States with patriotic education, the attack on Black education, the attack on Black history, the attack on Indigenous history, the representation of manifest destiny as something glorious rather than something deeply problematic. And of course their first target was Black history, right? Their first target was critical race theory. And critical race theory is just Black history, because critical race theory is the study of the practices that keep the institutions and practices that perpetuate racial hierarchies. That's Black history. The social movements that challenge those practices and institutions. Interestingly, in Ross Dowdat's interview with Rufo, somewhat, let's just say, normalize it. I mean, obviously normalizes what Rufo has been doing and is deeply problematic in that way. But it brought out some interesting things. First of all, you know, both of them are trying to be intellectual. I think Rufo's trying to be intellectually respectable there, and he's a smart guy. So they talk about these two obviously, you know, fascistic, authoritarian aspects of what's going on, and they disassociate themselves from it, even though Rufo was the one who brought them on. So you know, Dowdat correctly says, well, you know, what about the critical race theory stuff? That doesn't seem to be, you know, critical race theory doesn't seem to be about what you say it is. Critical race theory is a study of the institutions and practices that perpetuate racial hierarchy. Doesn't divide people into oppressor and oppressed and say you have to feel guilty for being white forever. So I was talking to a faculty member at another university who targeted in the South, where they had to fill out their chair, had to ask who was teaching critical race theory. And this professor was teaching Crenshaw. So I said, what did you say? And they said, well, I looked at what they said critical race theory was, and it obviously wasn't what I was teaching, so I said no. So Rufo says, oh yeah, I have nothing against studying mortgage redlining or the practices that further, you know, just critical race theory. And the other thing they said is they both came out against patriotic education. But Rufo is like, you know, Rufo is the person behind all we're seeing. So it's kind of, so, you know, in the pages of the New York Times, he's gonna say he's against patriotic education. But that's what they're trying to impose. So the first thing was the attack on Black history. If you're gonna construct patriotic education, you want to say the sins and problems of the past. By the way, if anyone leaves, I'm going to think it's because you think I'm saying something anti-Semitic.
No.
Just FYI. I know, you wouldn't leave for that reason.
No.
I'm very Jewish. Just a secret. So the way I think about Black history, indigenous history in the United States, the way I think about those histories and those experiences, well, obviously, indigenous history is the history of resistance to colonization, and the indigenous past is colonial. I mean, you know, we were colonized. I guess my parents came here in the 40s, but white Americans were colonizing indigenous populations. And although the structure with Black Americans is somewhat different, obviously, there's a chapter on colonialism here, colonial education. And actually the sort of tricky thing was recognizing that there are different kinds of colonial educations. And Rod Ferguson helped me a lot here, because Black education and Native American boarding schools, Carlisle School, for instance, they versus Hampton, they look somewhat different. So kill the savage, save the man was the motto of the Carlisle School, right? So you were trying to erase indigenous identity. But Black education was not like, you're really white. That's not how Black education worked. So if you're thinking of both of those as colonial education, so the classic book on indigenous boarding schools is called Education for Extinction. They're trying to get rid of the culture. But that's not what they were doing in Black education. They're trying to say, no, you're inferior, you have no history. In all the cases, the through line of all colonial education systems is telling colonized people they have no history. That they have no history, they've never done anything, they have no agency. You know, in the books that it's kind of astonishing that in the history books I was raised, and women never did anything. Like, for millions of years, no woman did anything. It was rather surprising. women, what are you doing? So that, but I don't know, I think that patriarchy, which Monty Perry calls the first ideology, is that's not a form of colonialism, maybe, but because who knows how to talk about it or structure it, but what you have, if you look at all these different colonial situations, it's similar to that in that you write everyone but the colonizer out of the history books. The great achievements are just done by the colonizers. And that's what looks like patriotic education is gonna look like in the United States. Now, they are gonna throw in one person. I thought you were J.D. Vance. So, sorry. I was like, whoa.
Get real.
What was I talking about?
Just quickly, Ben is gonna take your photo because he works.
Oh, good, sorry.
Go to that.
You can make it an alumnus visit, you know.
J.D. Vance is coming in and taking my photo. You don't look at all like J.D. So what I'm trying to do, so what we're doing in this structure, in the US, it's a very specific thing. It's saying that white men did everything except for Martin Luther King, who solved racism. So, you say, sorry, I'm trying to pose for the camera. So what you, in fighting fascism, you have to have aesthetically, you can't let the fascists be the only people with a Hugo Boss. So we have this particular version that allows one person to have agency, and you say, if Martin Luther King didn't solve racism, why is there a holiday about it? So that's our structure here. But what I do in that colonialism chapter is I try to find a through line between different colonial situations. And I pick out indigenous education, Black education in the South, and the U.S. representation and non-indigenous schools and Black schools of indigenous history and Black history. And I look at British colonialism in Kenya. So I take a deep dive in that. So you had this extraordinary thing where, you had these great schools like Alliance High School, which I discuss at some length. Basically what I do, a lot of my work plagiarizes my father's work. So my father wrote his dissertation on his dissertation was called Origins of Change, British Education and the Formation of the East African Intellectual. I said to my friend Mukoma Wathiongo at Cornell, I was like, this is the story of the East Africa's future leaders. He said, no, he's telling the history of the people who robbed East Africa, who stole everything in the future. So my dad was there from 1959 to 1959 to 1962, right before independence. And he wrote his dissertation on Alliance High School and Makerere University on the first generation of Western educated Kikuyu. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Mukoma got University of Michigan Press to agree to publish it. But I have to figure out how to get it together, because he spent 3 years doing this, like looking at, visiting the families of these Kikuyu students and doing hundreds of surveys with them about their attitudes towards all kinds of different topics. And his field notes are incredible. So I just simply steal from that, or that's the technical term. Is it plagiarism if it's your own father? No. So it is, technically. I don't plagiarize, I just use his materials. I don't write his sentences. Sorry, Aaron Sibarium, I'm not writing. So he looked at the British schools in Kenya. And that was its own particular version of things. And I use Guyu Thiongo's work a lot, like decolonizing the mind. What were they doing? They were eradicating Kikuyu identity. You couldn't speak the Kikuyu language in schools. They weren't telling you you are actually British. So it's kind of midpoint between indigenous education and indigenous schools, it's not education, indigenous schools and Black schooling. They weren't saying, okay, you're actually British, but they were trying to say, you know, before us, there were just savages, you were just savages, now we're giving you a history. We're giving you, and so you had these people who could go through all the royal families of Britain for hundreds of years, but couldn't say anything about the land on which they were living. They knew nothing about the history of the land on which they were living. And so the idea is you say there's no history and you owe everything to the British for bringing you civilization. And in exchange for that, in exchange for this great thing of making you Christian, you know, we're gonna take all the farmland. Which is what they did in Kenya. They put all the Kikuyu into reserves. They couldn't leave the reserves without a work permit from a white farmer. You know, so they had to do very well in work or else they'd lose their work permit and they couldn't leave these dusty reserves, which were places with no farmland. So, but they got Christianity as a result, so it was a fair trade. What I want to do is place patriotic education into that structure. The idea that the only people who give you a history are, you know, in the United States, that would be white Christians. And patriotic history is extolling the values of, oh my God. All right, I think I've done enough to, I think I should end soon.
Maybe in 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, I can end before then.
Do.
Okay, well, I want to have some discussion, so let me have a rousing ending. Okay, oh right, there's a chapter I forgot. There's a chapter on classical education here, because classical education is the rubric under which they're attacking universities. They're saying, we want to replace whatever they're doing with classical education. And if you look at some of the videos and some of the things that they're, if you look at some of like the Hillsdale College stuff, videos on their website that I discussed, they represent it as sort of wokeness is attacking the nuclear family and we have to bring back classical education or we're gonna have all this decadence and sort of destruction of Western civilization. So the idea is the nuclear family is under attack from these civilization destroying people who are basically groomers and pedophiles who think that older men can seduce their younger male students and the state should raise children and not families. Both ideas are from Plato. So I was giving a talk on this once and someone was ranting about classical education. Someone raised the question, it was like, they're indoctrinating people with woke ideology and we need to replace this. And I started saying, you mean removing kids from their families like Plato argues for in the Republic? And he's like, Plato was a pedophile.
Oh God.
And this is a person who is yelling at me about the importance of classical education. So the whole classical education, Rousseau also says we should take kids away from their families. I mean, you know, there's a lot of radical ideas in classical education. Thucydides is kind of critical of colonialism. There's a lot of radical ideas in classical education. What they're saying when they talk about classical education has nothing whatsoever to do with the texts that the ancients produced. Or at the very least, they're picking they're bizarrely picking and choosing. Because, natalism is not a big theme in the Republic. So this book's intended to give you weapons to respond to the ideological structure that we face. And that's what I've been trying to spell out right here. Now let's have a discussion. Thank you. Was that entertaining, Jack?
By the way, Thucydides, I like Greek generals who didn't lose battles.
Yeah, exactly.
And Rousseau was French.
What?
Rousseau was French.
Rousseau was French. Why do you say Rousseau was French? Well, I mean, Rousseau was
Because if I said he was Swiss,
Swiss. Oh, I see.
then it wouldn't have the same effect.
I see. Right. Yeah. Yes. Rousseau was Swiss. So Jack has spoken. Do you guys want me to call on you?
Let me try. This was fascinating, and what I thought when I was listening to this was there is the whole Hindutva concept that's permeating India right now. And that's
a major thing.
that is actually a rejection of the West. Okay, so they say we have our own culture, and that culture is superior to everything else, and it's more ancient than everything else.
If I was Hindutva, I definitely wouldn't be like, the West is the best, because that's.
So that's that book. I'm glad that I just bought the book online, so on Kindle. So the thing is, this historian called Janardhan Ganeri. He's actually a philosopher who writes about Indian logic, and he says
he's a philosopher, and people are constantly saying we're historians. He's not a historian. He's a philosophy professor at the University of Toronto.
So yes, and Oxford before that. And he said that the assumption that the West and the West alone had developed a science of reason was a fundamental axiom in the justification of the colonial enterprise as a civilizational process. He's written something that I've quoted somewhere else. So I was just thinking about that, and I was saying...
We made him an offer in our department.
Oh, okay.
So we read a lot of his work. He's great, and all what he says is true. But.
So I was just wondering about that and saying, well, so there's, even within this classicist approach, the fascist approach, there seems to be a kind of, I don't know whether you would call it South Asian, there are differences there too.
Okay, I'm so glad you've raised this host of issues of how to theorize Hindutva. A bunch of different issues here, and I'm so excited to talk about each one. And I'm going to try to not be confusing. But let's begin with the first thing you raised. Sorry, I got so excited when you were talking and I kept interrupting. But the first one you raised, Hindutva, Hindu nationalism, always claims the anti-colonialist mantle. So whenever you try to say, okay, maybe you shouldn't slaughter all the Muslims. So the West lecturing us again. You guys were the ones who, so Islam is supposed to be a colonialist thing. It's supposed to be India was a pure Hindu nation, and then Islam came from the West, and it was a colonialist thing, Islam. And so Hindu nationalism, so it's extremely important then to see when the mantle of anti-colonialism, look, I want to think through, I've been thinking through this a lot, but it just occurred to me now. I think of it as strategic because it's a strategic kind of anti-colonialism because of course Islam is not a colonialist. the Hindu tradition is not what the Hindu nationalists say it is. It's not as, women's equality is not some radical idea imported from, that does not exist in Hindu traditions. That's why they attack theorists like Wendy Doninger, who say actually Hinduism has this much more, has lots of things for lots of people. So they're taking the mantle of anti-colonialism, just like some people might take the mantle of anti-Semitism. Like now, a bunch of anti-Semites are saying we're the Queen Esther, gonna defend you Jews from, but that is obviously just cynical. Now, I believe that, so what to do about the fact that, the Hindu nationalists are all doing this under a cover of anti-colonialism. They're all, so just because and what they're doing is they're imposing a hegemonic, one-dimensional view of history that obliterates the perspective of the non-dominant groups. And they're saying, actually, it's the minority groups, it's who are the colonialists. And if we think of colonialism in terms of who has the power, that's obviously not true. So who can tell who has the power to tell the stories? So, once when I was teaching in prison, I was going back and forth with this guy, this student Clyde Mikla, and who was a big fan of Carl Schmitt. And he was like, Professor Stanley, you keep on talking about democracy and reason as if they're not themselves just mechanisms to further an ideological agenda, essentially. I'm like, yeah, that's what Carl Schmitt said, and he was a Nazi. And that was a cheap blow, I admit. But he responded, he said, Carl Schmitt chose the wrong people to valorize. And then I said, he chose the dominant group. And I said, what if the non-dominant group becomes dominant? He's like, well, that will never happen. And if it does, the non-dominant group will just behave anyone who becomes dominant will just behave in the same way. So I think that's what's happening in India, that's what's happening in Israel. The once non-dominant group is just taking the exact same tactics and, but under a certain cover. Right now, Indian philosophy is undergoing a renaissance in analytic philosophy because it's the closest tradition to analytic philosophy. University of Toronto, where Ganari teaches, has a flourishing group in Indian philosophy. We have graduate students working in Indian philosophy. The reason is because, unlike, say, Confucianism, they're much more obvious. They're talking about a lot of the same questions that like Alvin Goldman is talking about in the 1960s. So there's, it's not just philosophy, it's analytic philosophy that a lot of it, there's Indian philosophy of language, that there's 9th century Indian philosophy of language. So I could geek out about this topic for a long time. I don't know Indian philosophy, you need to know the languages, you need to know, I'm not, just like with ancient philosophy, I'm a reader of ancient philosophy, but there's a huge, Indian philosophy is much closer to 20th and 21st century American and British philosophy than any other tradition that we know of. So, as Ganari said, it's logic, philosophy of language. But there's a lot of overlap, and a lot of traditions are talking about modality. A lot of traditions are talking about knowledge, but the way Indian philosophy talks about it is like very recognizable to contemporary philosophers. Okay. And then finally on India. India is an important case for me because I'm trying to argue we're seeing a worldwide resurgence of fascism. And recently I was talking to someone who's a scholar of India, I won't mention their name, very brilliant, and they were like attacking me for saying fascism is relevant now. Like, oh, like, you know, it's like, it's just neoliberalism and standard sort of like, this is just business as usual in America. I'm like, what about in India? Like, oh, well, there is fascism, of course. You know, so, because RSS said they were imitating the Nazis. So you don't need like to read between the lines, like, and they march.
Further, the Aryan superculture is supposed to have, Hitler is supposed to have got his ideas from a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, well, Hitler regarded Aryans, yeah, so that overlapping. Yeah, okay, we can. Anyone have questions? More questions about India?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what sort of a adequate patriotic education would look like. I think a number of years ago, I was teaching American Studies, and it's obviously a biased sample size, but I was talking to the students, and I had about 20 students between two classes, and only 2 of the 20 actually thought the American project was at all redeemable. All the others thought the US should ultimately be destroyed, that it was like this deeply flawed project due to the racism and imperialism of the past, that there was really the only reason to like obey the state was simply the threat of coercive force. And I found myself like deeply uncomfortable with this, right? Thinking a lot about like Richard Rorty and Achieving Our Country, talking about like how maybe you need some kind of like patriotic core. I guess my question is like, to what degree do you need some kind of patriotic core? What is that supposed to look like?
Yeah, great. I mean, the attack on Nicole Hannah-Jones has been really interesting in this respect. Because Nicole Hannah-Jones is an American exceptionalist. You know, her work is all about how America is the greatest nation in the world. And it's the greatest nation in the world largely because of Black people, which is one way to do it, right? But she believes that. I mean, that's the core of her work. It's been interesting to see the reaction to that work, because I have a criticism of Nicole Hannah-Jones, which is that she's an American exceptionalist. There were also other remarkable, people in the world, and not just Black Americans, and so and Americans. Like, she's saying we have this greatest thing in the world here, democracy, and it's all an American thing, and Black Americans were central to it. That seems correct, that Black Americans were central to great things in America. But then she gets attacked by the right. It's like, what, for attacking America? Which is like, what? She's saying America is the greatest nation in the world, and that's because of Black America, largely because of Black Americans. Anyway, so anything, what I saw from that is like, even if you're explicitly saying that America is the greatest nation in the world, people are gonna hear it differently, depending on, or maybe I was just trying to shoehorn that remarkable thing about the response to Nicole Hannah-Jones to you. But yeah, I mean, I think, I think that, is there an acceptable form of patriotic education in a democracy that's supposed to involve self-critique, freedom and equality? I think Dewey might be a source here, because Dewey gives you a place where you can say, look, democracy is a project that it's like a fundamental error to say we're irredeemable. Like, what does that even mean? Democracy is a set of practices that moves towards the future to realize democratic values. And America is founded on democratic values, so it's the initiation of this project that goes forward towards ever more freedom and equality. So, if that's, if you mean by America some piece of land, well, that's different. But let's call the American project that project of realizing these democratic values. That's not an irredeemable project. That's a project of, democracy is that project. The fact that we started from a bad place, well, that's like, I'm not going to be able to give a clear answer here, but I would interrogate. I mean, the response if someone says to me, "America is irredeemable," is what do you mean? What does that even mean? I mean, if you think of this country as a democratic project that, has these ideals, democracy is a practice that we're supposed to ever improve. And if you give up on the country, you're giving up on the practice of improving it. That would be, and I think is Howard, look at social movements, look at the histories of the civil rights movement. Well, now I'm just gonna go on about what I find great about America, so I don't know. But everywhere you go in the world, people know about the civil rights movement, they don't know about the Dutch, so whatever is happening in the Netherlands, sure. But so I think calling attention to the things that increase the realization of democratic values and point out that if we think of America as a project that is based in those democratic values, we can recognize, and if we think correctly of democracy as a practice, then we can see the talk of irredeemability as like giving up on democracy.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, your book falls very topical these days. But from a practical point of view, we see the power of the purse that the federal government uses. Columbia University is an explicit example. From a practical point of view, what do you hope and what do you expect that university administrators do? Because they are in this dilemma of keeping the academic liberty and research and critical capacity. And on the other hand, this will cut right into their capacity to have staff do this. And so what are your hopes and expectations on that front from a practical point of view?
Great question. We all have to be asking that question, and I don't pretend to have the answers.
No.
Okay? We should all be discussing with each other about the answers. But the last chapter of this book is called Reclaiming History, and that's partly a response to there are progressive education movements. I think what we need to do is tie progressive education movements to the project of America, which I believe they are tied to it. And I think Zinn is someone who agrees with that, but they're gonna, it's been very interesting because I've been on the faculty senate for years and watching these conversations and putting together the sciences with the humanities. I remember the last couple of years, one of the big things the Yale Faculty Senate was trying to do. It's a problem. The Yale Faculty Senate is only a faculty senate for the real part of the university, arts and sciences, not for the whatever parts. But the scientists and the humans, the scientists were trying to draw our attention to a case in the sciences where a professor was sort of singled out for supposedly funneling secrets to China or doing something with China. And so the humanists, we were kind of not understanding, what's going on? Lab money, what? And so I don't think we were as sympathetic as we should have been. And then we didn't see it for what it was, which was an authoritarian attack on American science, which is what the scientists were telling us was happening. And they're like, can we pass a resolution about this? Can we? And we were like, critical race theory, they're attacking critical race theory. Can we pass a resolution? And they weren't understanding us there. Then I think as this regime was coming into focus, the initial thought, Mari McGinnis, the Yale president, I had a meeting with her and then I went back and forth with the faculty, and she was always saying the same thing. We're popular as long as we don't talk about the humanities. If you look at Yale today, it looks like Yale University has no faculty members who ever speak about politics or ever speak to the current moment. We just do pimple cream, weight loss, happiness, corporate happiness, that's what we do here. Move on, nothing to see. And so they deliberately excise anything that is relevant to the current moment and so Mari McGinnis explained the strategy. She said, our people tell us that as long as we represent ourselves as a science and medical research institute, we'll be fine. Because people are in favor of science and medical research. It's the humanities that we don't like. Now, of course, Yale is a great science university. We're probably 115th or 215th or something, right? But in the humanities, we're unquestionably the best in the world. So it's kind of a weird strategy to take when you have the best humanities institution in the world. But that's the strategy we took. So it was kind of surprised to find out that they were targeting the sciences. That was kind of shock and awe. So one of the lessons is solidarity. Don't sell people out. There's a petition going around the university asking the university to dump administration before faculty. That's exactly what they want us to push. No, you go in the fire line, you go over the cliff. Your family should you should be able to not pay your mortgage. So there's gonna be a lot of that. There's gonna be a lot of people trying to exploit the moment to get their rivals. But what we're seeing is that they don't actually care. They know the physics department doesn't have any Trump supporters or has one or two Trump supporters. They know there's actually not that much difference between the English department and the physics department in terms of political affiliations. So they're going after everybody, and so solidarity is the first thing. So, they're like, the universities have to hire more Trump supporters and be more like the rest of the country. Well, what do you want your physics department to look like? Do you really want affirmative action for Trump supporters in the physics department? What does that look like? What does a university like that look like? So let's just drop. So I think it was kind of a shock to see that it wasn't just gonna be women and gender studies. It was gonna be actual, the entire research apparatus of the university. So solidarity is the first thing. The second thing is nothing you say or do is gonna matter to what they're planning to do. They're gonna do it anyway. Columbia has been a model of obsequiousness, cowardice, and pitifulness that history will write about. History will write about Columbia University's cowardice right now. Has it helped them at all? No, because they already planned to go after Columbia University. So they don't care what you're gonna do. Now, people are like, well, should we really stand up and then we'll be targeted? It's like, they're gonna do what they're gonna do. And they're like, what if we're targeted? And then they're threatening you. They're like, well, if we're targeted, and if we stand up and we're targeted, you're to blame for saying we should have stood up. No, if we're targeted, they were gonna target you anyway. And so, so it may still be that if you stand up and protest and stand up for the university, for the public school, you stand up against encroaching autocracy, you'll be targeted. But that's only because you're gonna be targeted anyway. And so the main risk is having your grandkids be ashamed, if you have them be ashamed of you. And so, because they're gonna do what they're gonna do. And there's no, like I said recently to someone, I said, wow, they're gonna use federal funding to force the universities to do what they want. And the person was like, no, and don't say that. They're gonna use federal funding to destroy the universities, whatever the universities do.
Yeah.
So may as well do what Michael Roth is doing. They haven't gone out of their way to punish Wesleyan because they don't even notice. They've already decided what they're gonna do. So they're not gonna really, they're gonna do the things they're gonna do anyway. So my strategic advice would be to be vocal, to work behind the scenes and be vocal about the defense of democracy. And if it doesn't work, well, it wouldn't have worked anyway. I mean, do you want to preserve your institution? Or do you want to preserve the name of your institution? Those to me are two very different things. Do you want to preserve the name Yale University? Sure, hire a bunch of Trump supporters in the physics department, do whatever. But if you wanna preserve Yale University, the institution, that requires standing up for democracy.
I'm from the engineering side of campus, and we tell the story of like, well, never do anything, you do everything to us. It's like, that's the story of the sciences. It's like, right, it's like, yeah, everything goes through the Western tradition of like, everything came from Newton and Maxwell all the way back to Euclid. So then I think this is why on the engineering side, people are a bit surprised, because it's like, that's the only story we have. We were already on board with this thing that we know is not true, right?
Right.
That's all we had. So then when the funding is then pulled from there, it's like, yeah, but don't you want us to build like missiles for you or something like that? People are surprised. So then I guess
That's a really interesting.
yeah, I'm like, I don't understand the play there. Like I see it happening and my colleagues do, but what is the play?
The play against you guys, against scientists.
Yeah, it's like what?
Because they wanna take down, that's what I was kind of hinting at. The scientists are very surprised that they're the targets.
Because that's where the federal money is.
Yeah.
That's where because it's
Right.
like, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is.
Right.
Again, though, but it was for your missiles, so yeah. It's like, was that more important?
But if you wanted to destroy universities, what would you do? You'd squeeze their budget, so they in turn would squeeze the parts of the university that make the least money.
They're going after the universities. Because the universities are first of all, they want to transform them to institutions of patronage and use whatever. But secondly, they're like places where people have they're places where young people are and tend to protest, and tend to be political, and faculty tend to feel like they can speak their mind. The kind of people who go into universities tend not to be their supporters, right? I mean, I would guess that even the engineering faculty is not filled with vociferous Trump supporters. Like,
I mean, look at these faculty letters and you search for people who are in Cs, there's like 3 names that signed. So it's if it's not vociferous Trump supporters, it's like if you want the region of campus that is the most mushy on these issues, it's like go to Cs.
oh, go to Cs, yeah. Well, faculty senate is the FASC's faculty senate, so and we do have some leaders from the engineering school who are, I mean, because everybody's being targeted, you guys see that you're being targeted. And so, and this is what I was responding to you, we need solidarity. And so that basically is, the universities, for a host of reasons, the universities are targets. In authoritarian countries, universities are targets. So, are they even going to be, I mean, I think there's one thing that I've been omitting in this discussion that should be discussed, which is the desire to make it all into sort of push everything into private companies. And so all funding, all projects are gonna be done by private companies. The United States has long had this this partnership between universities and the federal government. And I think they're attacking that because they want it all to be done by private companies.
I should just add here that this is especially true in the context of artificial intelligence, because in artificial intelligence, universities are actually at somewhat of a disadvantage in terms of their computing power and access to facilities, whereas private research institutions funded by places like Google, they actually have access to computing facilities, computing power. So one of the things that's very interesting about this current world is it's a world in which the previous robber barons, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Yale and Stanford, created universities. But there's no guarantee that the next generation, our current generation of robber barons, Zuckerberg, Bezos, etc., will create universities. In fact, it's much more likely they'll create private research institutions, which have the advantage of not having humanities departments attached to them.
Right. That's depressing, Jack.
I am here to cheer you up.
Yeah, right. The university as a structure is what's being attacked.
Just kind of a follow-up question to that. it might be too recent to properly think through, but to what extent can we interpret the new attack on federal workers and on universities as something that's a completely new economic argument rather than fitting into the history of fascism? Or do you think there is a way that this new economic argument, seemingly new economic argument, actually just fits right into what has always been going on?
It's just too, I mean, again, you get into this thing of like, is anyone reading the history books? But I don't think I think it's, the structure is they're lazy. You know, they're living off your taxes. They have more respect. They think they're better than you. That is exactly, you know, it's an appeal to, and then they want to use the money they allegedly will save for tax cuts for the wealthy. So I'm not sure what the economic argument is, other than the wealthy need more tax cuts. I mean, I think it's, remember what Russell Vaught said. We're gonna make them, we're gonna traumatize the federal workers, we're gonna make them the enemy. It wasn't like he was like, this is an economic argument. He was like, we're gonna make them the enemy, we're gonna make everyone hate federal workers. And when I taught Reich's 1936 book, that was shocking to me, to see, wow, that's been done before. Now, of course, ultimately, they're gonna replace those federal workers by loyalists, by political partisans. So I, you know, the overarching argument that you could call economic is, you know, they're telling people these people are lazy and living off the state. You know, you know, they're, as Russell Vaught says, we're gonna make them the enemy. It's an argument about villainizing them and getting votes and support by villainizing federal workers. And then they're gonna replace them like Gleichschaltung. So I don't know, it just seems like a successful playbook move. Like, one of the problems is so little seems new. I think, you know, maybe some of the tax stuff, I'm hoping for some new authoritarian moves. But, you know, we'll have to wait to see some more, hopefully some creativity is coming.
Unfortunately, this has come to an end, but thank you so much for